Hello my friends, how are you today? We are here for Sewing in Slippers with Sue, and our topic for today is going to be temperature quilts. So let's get started with discussion about what a temperature quilt is and how you can make one for yourself. So let me give you a little bit of history. I started a temperature quilt project last year in 2020 because I really wanted to use my Leaves Galore tools to make an applique temperature quilt that would represent all the high and low temperatures for each day in 2022. I had been watching the temperature quilts pop up all over the internet, and I was a little jealous. I wanted to make one for myself. So I started designing this quilt in 3 different sizes because we can make leaves with 3 different size tools, and those leaves can be rotary cut, so it really speeds up this whole process of making this quilt. So last year I teamed up with cherry wood fabrics, and let's see, I think I took out the cherry wood kit that we offered last year to make this quilt. So let me grab that kit for you so you can see all of the beautiful colors. So if you know cherry wood fabrics, you know that they are absolutely beautiful, hand-dyed fabric in every color of the rainbow. So I chose a muted selection of hand-dyed fabrics that are the colors of the rainbow, but they're really grayed down. They're not real bright colors. This is just the palette that I wanted to work with. Well, today we're going to talk about choosing your color palette for your next temperature quilt. If you have any desire to make a temperature quilt, you'll want to tune in and listen to our discussion of how you go about starting a temperature quilt. Now, 2023 is just around the corner, and you may want to join in our Temperature Quilt Facebook group. Good morning. Nice to see some users popping up on Facebook, and we're talking today about planning for your next temperature quilt. So I started a Facebook group. It is called the Temperature Quilt Block a Day. You only need to make 1 block each day to keep up with your temperature quilt project. And my challenge to our group members was to spend just a little bit of time every day. I think it takes about maybe 5 or 10 minutes to make my temperature quilt blocks each day. So my challenge was to spend that 5 or 10 minutes each day just to kick off your sewing session for each day. And I had another 2022 challenge to sew 22 minutes a day. So you could get your temperature quilt block done in the first 5 or 10 minutes. Then you could move forward on other quilting projects. Well, I'm going to challenge you again in 2023 to spend 23 minutes a day quilting. Now that's an increase of 1 minute each day. How much more are you going to get done? Probably lots more, because it's not just the mindset of spending 23 minutes a day. It's getting started nice and the first chance that you can in the morning. And that quilting 23 minutes will probably kickstart an even longer session for you. If you can commit to 23 minutes a day, sometime throughout the day, more than likely you're going to end up spending more than that. But even in 23 minutes a day for 2023, you will be amazed how much you can get accomplished. Well, good morning everyone. Good morning from Missouri. Good morning, Ellie. Please put your name next to your Facebook comment because I don't see your names here on StreamYard. So you can give StreamYard permission for me to see your names, or if you haven't done that, just put your name next to your comment on Facebook. That way I can see it while I'm here on StreamYard. StreamYard is just a way for me to stream to many different locations on social media. So this live stream is going to YouTube, it's going to my Facebook group, and it's going to one of my private Facebook groups. So it's going to the Rotary Cut Applique group, it's going to the Ahead of the Curve group, and we're going live on YouTube all at the same time. So I use this service called StreamYard, and what that means is I can't see your name next to your comments unless you put your name in there. Good morning, Kathy from Ohio. Excellent. There you all are. Good, you found us. Fantastic. So what I was showing everybody were these luscious colors from cherry wood fabrics that I used for last year's temperature quilt. Then, when I did the temperature quilt project last year, we did this project as a quilt as you go quilt. I'm currently writing the pattern for the 3 sizes of the temperature quilt. So if you missed out on our temperature quilt last year, soon you'll be able to get it as a pattern. In the meantime, today I'm going to show you how to make this block with the 4-inch leaf. Now that makes a good size quilt. It's going to be a quilt for my queen size bed, and I can't wait to get this one finished. I have gotten the first 2 seasons quilted. So this is season 1 with January, February, and March. Then this was season 2, April, May, and June. And I've joined the 2 seasons together with a sashing strip that I did in a quilt as you go method. So that's what the pattern's going to be all about. Not just the simple block for our temperature quilt. That you're going to be able to see today. I'm going to show you how to make this block today. But in the pattern, we're going to have the method for making this quilt with the sashings in between, machine quilting in sections, and then putting the sections together in a quilt as you go method. So I just wanted to share last year's quilt with you, and in just a moment we're going to tackle last year's block. So if you are considering making a temperature quilt this upcoming year, this could be one of your choices for what type of quilt to make. Now, another block that I want to demonstrate today is the block that Beth Helfter used for her temperature quilt this year. So if you have been following along with my temperature quilt Facebook group, you're going to see that Beth Helfter is making a different block, and she's using our Rotary Cut Applique methods to do it. So I want to show you how to make the block for my temperature quilt for 2022, but I'm also going to be showing you how to make the temperature quilt block for the latest temperature quilt that I'm going to make. I'm going to start a 2023 project. And then at the end of today's show, we're going to talk about all of the different stitching methods that you can use for your block. So don't let me forget to talk about the stitching methods. So what have I done here? I have taken out all of my Rotary Cut Applique tools because we're going to be using the Leaves Galore tools for last year's block, and then we're going to be using the Hearts and More tools for this year's temperature quilt block. Now maybe you've never ever wanted to make a temperature quilt. You haven't even thought about it, and it's not something that's on your calendar to do for this year. Well, that's okay. I think that you're going to enjoy this little recap of how to rotary cut your applique shapes to make both the leaves, and by the way, those leaves are the same exact leaf that are in this quilt behind me, the Star Struck pattern. And that pattern's available on my website. So you could make the Star Struck pattern with this technique, or, I'm sorry, I thought I had turned off my phone. I thought I had, and I did, but somehow the notifications are still happening, so sorry about that. Okay, let me turn off the volume, and hopefully that will do the job. So, You could make a starstruck quilt with this same technique of cutting the leaves, and I'm going to show you how to make the block for the temperature quilt using that same leaf. Then we're going to cut out our applique circles, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do applique circles in order to do the block that I'm going to use for my 2023 quilt. Now, in order to make that 2023 quilt, I need to think about what colors I'm going to use for my temperature quilt. So if you're over there on my Facebook group, I started making a color chart to share with my Facebook group this morning. That's the Temperature Quilt Facebook group. I started making my color chart and I ran out of time. So I've been working on this, something that I can put in the group files, so that if you need help with your temperature quilt, if you need help getting started, I can share these files with you over on that Temperature Quilt Facebook group. So if you're not a member of that group already, you might just want to join, if temperature quilt is something that's in your future. So the temperature quilt that I made last year has a color chart that has all of the cherry wood fabrics on it. So I'm looking for my color chart. For every big quilt that I make, I have a binder, and in that binder are all of the instructions that I share with the people making the quilt with me. So here is the blank temperature quilt from 2022. Now that blank temperature quilt chart has a space for anybody, anywhere in the country, to put in your high and your low temperatures and the color that's going to represent that temperature range. So how do we get started making a temperature quilt? Let's talk a little bit about where you're going to get your information from and how you're going to fill out that initial chart. We can talk about the range of temperatures in your area and how you're going to divide up that range into the number of colors that you want to use. I had a really nice friendly visit with Beth Helfter the other day after she was on Sewing in Slippers with me, and her beautiful temperature quilt was on the wall behind her during that interview. So if you go back to Sewing in Slippers a couple of weeks, you'll see the interview with Beth Helfter, and you'll see that beautiful temperature quilt that she's making using the Rotary Cut Applique method. So I was over at her house a few days ago, and I said to Beth, could I just see your color chart? Because I'd love to see the way you broke down your colors. And it was so funny. She took out a piece of paper that kind of looked like this. It was her sheet of paper, and it was torn across the bottom because she needed a note, so she grabbed a piece of paper from her temperature chart and jotted down on that piece of paper were some random scribbles of her temperatures and the color, just the name of the color. So next to minus 10 degrees to 0 degrees, she had jotted down the word black. Well, she doesn't like temperatures under 0 degrees, so she wanted to use her least favorite color for that temperature range. So she jotted down black under that section. And then she scratched it out and added a different color because she decided she didn't want to use black. It was so comical because it was so loose and free, and if you know Beth, it was just her style. Nothing fancy, nothing pristine, you know, it was just, let's have some fun with this, let's get going, let's not stress over the details. So she didn't take the time to make a fancy little color chart like I'm going to make, that I didn't have time to do. She really just dove right in and just jotted down the colors that she wanted for her temperature quilt. So that's why I have my phone up here. I wanted to actually find the photograph of her temperature quilt chart, and I wanted to share that with all of you because I just got such a kick out of it. Now let's see, I'm going to rotate that picture, and I will bring that up to the camera so all of you can see it because it's so darn cute. So let's see if I can get up to the camera. I'm not sure that I can because I put my table here. But there is her ripped up piece of paper with all of her temperatures on it. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I'm going to jot down the color ranges that the temperature ranges that she used, and I'll pretty it up and I'll make a nice little chart for you to use based on the temperature ranges in your area. Now, Beth lives in Massachusetts, so the way she approached her quilt was to divide our temperature range, our typical temperature range here in Massachusetts, in 10-degree increments. Now, I want to share with you what I did on last year's temperature quilt. It was a lot more detailed, and so I want to explain both approaches so that you can decide what would be right for your temperature quilt this year. So, below 10, I'm wrong. She didn't say black. Below 10 was her light blue. Below minus 10. Below minus 10. Oh, that's funny because I have never seen the temperatures drop to below minus 10 here in Massachusetts. So I don't think she's going to use very much light blue. And then minus 10 to 0 was going to be pink. Then from 1 degree to 10 degrees. And this is something you have to think about. When you divide up your temperatures, you have to decide where that is 0 and 1 is going to go into. So from minus 10 to 0, that's going to be pink. And then from 1 degree to 10 degrees, that was going to be purple in her quilt. Then from 11 to 20, she had blue. From 21 to 30, she had teal. From 31 to 40, she had dark green. 41 to 50 was lime. I love lime. That's such a great color. So dark green and lime were just one space apart. And so you're going to have a lot of green. So you're going to have from 31 to 50, all of those colors are going to be green. But she really loves the lime green, and it is so beautiful in her quilt. So I'm going to keep my colors the same as Beth Helfter's. Why go through all that work rethinking this when I loved the result of her quilt? So 51 to 60 is going to be yellow. 61 to 70 is orange. Now, Beth was so funny that she chose orange for 61 to 70. 61 to 70 in New England is probably our most common temperature. We get it in the spring, we get it in the fall, we'll even get a few temperatures in the winter time. This week it's supposed to get up to 61. And in the summer, if we have a cool day, it's in that range as well. So orange ended up being the most common temperature in her quilt. And if you're like me, you don't have a lot of orange fabric. So she was scrambling and asking all of her friends to donate orange fabrics to make this temperature quilt. I love that idea. I'm a real orange girl, as you can see. All my tools are orange, so I think I'm going to go with that. I think I'm going to use orange for that temperature range as well, and I'm just going to have to seek out all those orange fabrics from anywhere in the world in order to keep up with those temperatures. Then from 71 to 80 is dark orange. Oh my gosh! So there's really a huge amount of orange, not only in 61 to 70, but dark orange from 71 to 80. Then she used magenta from 81 to 90. And then dark purple from 91 to 100. Now, it's pretty rare, again, that we get over 100, but I'm going to say 100 plus. She put red, and I like that idea. That really says hot, hot, hot when you have a red in your quilt. So here we go. I've got my color chart all penciled in. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find representative fabrics, and I'm going to place them over these blue spots. So I'm going to recolor these, so they're probably going to be all gray on the temperature chart that I share with all of you, so you can put your own colors in there no matter what you choose them to be. So if you go this route where you're doing 10-degree increments, I'm going to have a color chart that's all prepared for you, and that's going to be in the file section of the Facebook group. I'll try to get that done by the end of the week. So as you're planning your temperature chart next week before the first week of the year, you can get your temperature quilt chart done. Now, I also will share with you a more detailed temperature chart, and I'm going to take the years off of these because you could use these for any year in the future. So it's just going to be a 10-degree range chart, and then this chart is for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 colors. So in the one case, I decided to use 10-degree increments. In the second case, I decided to use 22 fabrics. Now the reason I decided on 22 fabrics, because as I was going through the cherry wood fabrics, I found 22 beautiful shades that went from my greens to my yellows and everything in between. All the colors of the rainbow ended up 22 shades. Then I asked Cherrywood to make a temperature quilt kit. That kit contains all 22 colors. Now, if you love my temperature quilt and you love those colors, that kit is still available from Cherrywood Fabrics. So you can go talk to Carla, ask her for the Sue Ellen Designs 2022 temperature quilt kit, and she'll be able to make up that kit for you. She texted me the other day and said, I'm still selling those kits from 2022. What do you want to do? And I said, absolutely, you sell the kits. I don't need to have any part of it this year. I used to sell them on my website, but she's going to handle those all through her website and keep those 2022 colors that I chose. So no matter where you are in the world, you can make a color chart with those 22 colors, or maybe you want to eliminate a few. Maybe you're going to use 20 colors or 18 colors. So how do you go about finding the temperature range in your area and dividing them into the number of colors that you want to use? Well, I used a company called Weather Underground. It's a website called Weather Underground. And on Weather Underground, which is shorthand Wonderground, and I think it's .org or .com, I'm not sure. But if you go to Wonderground, you're going to be able to find the temperature range in your area. You can look at historical data, you can look at the year that you want to choose for your quilt, and you can look at the low temperature, the high temperature, and even the average temperature. So Weather Underground is where I got all of my historical temperature data for. So I went through and I looked at the last few years, and I decided that 22 degrees worked out 22 colors worked out really well. So let's look at your temperature range for your area. Maybe you live someplace like I do, where your temperature range can go anywhere from 0 to 100. If you take 100-degree temperature range and divide that by your 22 colors, you come up with how many degrees per color. So I ended up doing 4-degree increments, and I do have my detail of my chart somewhere, but it doesn't matter because everybody's charts are going to be different. Depending on your average temperature range, your chart might look very different from mine. If you want to use 22 colors, you might have 2 degrees per color, or even 1 degree per color if you live in some place like Hawaii, where there's not a wide temperature range for the year. So you'll take your average temperature range, the highest temperature in any given year, the lowest temperature in any given year, and find out how big that range is. and you're going to divide your range by the number of colors you want to use. So you can do a chart like this one and use 10 different colors or 12 different colors, or you can use the chart like this one and use up to 22 different colors. Then, once you find the temperature range per color, you're going to jot down the high and the low temperature, making sure that you are excluding those endpoints. So if your low is 0 and your high is 4, then your next temperature grouping is going to be from 5 to 9, and then from 10 to 14, and then 15 to 19. So you get the idea. You want to make sure you have 4 degrees in each grouping, and you're not repeating those numbers on either end. Once you divide up your average temperatures into those ranges, you can cut a piece of fabric and glue it right in place, and that's the color that's going to be used for that range. So simple, easy, but there's a few little stopping points where people were getting a little bit stuck on how to find the temperature range using Wonderground or Weather Underground for your temperature range. You can look at historical data so that you can get an idea of what to expect this year. But you also need to think about, what if our temperatures are out of whack? What if you get a higher than high temperature or a lower than low temperature? So your first temperature might be under 4 degrees, even if you've never seen anything under 0 before. You just want to be prepared just in case. So under 4 degrees for our lowest temperature, over 100 degrees for our highest temperature, whatever works for your area of the country. So I'm going to share with you these 2 different color charts, and I'll put that in the temperature quilt group so that you can access those, you can print those out, you can have those so that you can make your own temperature quilt chart. Then we need to plan our quilt. So I have a pattern in one of my books that uses this exact block that I used for my first temperature quilt. So that quilt is in my first book here, and that quilt is called Mint Chocolate. So for those of you that know my quilts, Mint Chocolate was a really popular pattern that we did a few years ago as a quilt-along. We did that as a 60-day quilt-along. That's 644 leaf and square blocks. Now, if you break this up, you're actually going to make more than that. You're going to do the high and low temperature every day for 365 days. So you're making twice that many blocks, but it's not difficult to do. So I want to help you get started with that block. So if you want to make your block just like mine, what you have is a square, unfused background, and then a diagonally placed leaf over that background. So let's look at the numbers. So if you're going to use your simple standard leaf, there's a table in the back of the book called Standard Diagonal Measurements. It's table 5. So I'm going to use the Grand Leaves Galore template to cut out 4-inch leaves. So I'm going to look across the chart, and it tells me what size the finished square needs to be in order to have that 4-inch leaf sitting on the diagonal. And it turns out that we need to cut our squares 3 3/8 inches. So let's go ahead and cut some squares at 3 3/8 inches. Now, what color is that square going to be? Well, on my temperature quilt, I used a gray fabric for those squares. So let me go ahead and grab that gray fabric so that you can see what I used. and I'll see if I can cut some more squares. Okay, so this is the size square that I used. This happened to be a square that didn't come out very well. The stitching didn't come out well here at the point, so we just tossed it aside. But that's the size square that I used for my first temperature quilt. Now, in order to cut those squares, we are going to measure 3 3/8 inches. Did I say 3/4? The size is 3 3/8 inches. So I'll take my gray fabric and I'll cut crosswise strips across the width of the fabric, 3 3/8. Okay, then I'll take that strip and turn it so that I'm cutting the other direction, 3 3/8 inches. Now I realize you're not seeing my cutting station, so let me just adjust my camera so that you can see my cutting station here on the table. All right, I apologize for the mess here on the table, but I pulled out a lot of fabrics so I could play with this technique. So once I have cut my squares at 3 3/8 inches, and I've got a whole pile of my background color squares, then I need to cut out my leaf shapes. So let me demonstrate cutting out the leaf shapes using the Grand Leaves Galore tool. I'm going to put aside these fabrics because I'm going to use those fabrics for my second block today. Let me just give myself a little bit of space here to cut, which means I have to move my keyboard. Okay. So in order to cut those 4-inch leaves, we're going to start with our fabric that has fusible on the back of it. I've added Misty Fuse to the back of my fabric in order to cut out my 4-inch leaves with the Misty Fuse on the back. Now, you might want to cut several colors of fused fabric together. Maybe you're going to use your dark burgundy for one temperature range, then you're going to use your light pink for a second temperature range, and then we're going to use this beautiful teal green for a different temperature range. When you do that, I like to have my fabrics cut at about 12.5 inches wide. The reason why I use 12.5 inches of fused fabric is because I'm going to be cutting my leaves using the Grand Leaves Galore tool. When you stack up 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 4-inch leaves, that's 16 inches. So from 12.5 we can get 1, 2, 3 4-inch leaves along that 12.5-inch piece of fabric. So let's go ahead and start cutting our leaves, and I'm going to put that 12.5-inch piece of fabric right on top. They're not all 12.5, but I'm going to pretend that they are. And let's see, do I have 12.5 here? No, I've only got a little over 12, but what I'm recommending is that you cut from 12.5-inch pieces of fabric. That way you don't have to be quite so precise on where you place this tool. I'm going to move over a little bit because it's got my name right there, and you're going to have a hard time seeing with my name in the way when I'm cutting. So let's go ahead and line up our tool with the bottom of the fabric. I'm putting the letter I right on the bottom of that fabric, and that's going to give me 3 4-inch leaves within that 12-inch space. Now if I had 12.5 inches, I would start about 1/4 of an inch up, with the eye about 1/4 of an inch up from the edge of the fabric. But I'm squeezing it into a 12-inch piece of fabric, so I'm putting the letter I right at the bottom of the fabric. That's going to give me a full leaf right there at the bottom of the fabric. So I'm going to cut up the edge like this, making one serpentine line. Now, if you're not comfortable cutting curves with your tools, that's a skill that we learn in our membership. Rotary cutting our applique shapes is what my membership is all about. Now, it's not just for these leaves. There are all different ways we can use these tools to cut our fusible applique shapes. The leaves is the easiest shape, and that's the one I want to show you today. After cutting once with a serpentine line on the edge of the tool, we're going to pull that tool down by one full leaf shape. Then I'm going to line up the dash line on the tool with the line that I've just cut. I'm going to match that up in 3 spots, and I'm going to cut the second time to cut out that leaf shape. Now, when I'm giving my students tips on cutting, one of my biggest tips is cut on a table that's really low. My table's up really high, so you can see it in this demonstration. If you missed our demo days last week, this is basically what I was doing. I was giving demos of how to use the Leaves Galore tools and the Hearts and More tools to rotary cut your applique shapes. Now, the benefit of using these tools is that you get leaves cut all at once, one after the other, using up to 4 layers of fabric at a time. So all of your leaves come out perfectly sized and shaped every single time. Well, I'm just going to take the dark leaves, and one of the shortcuts that I used last year in 2022, this past year, that's still not finished yet. I'm still working on this quilt. But what I did was I took these squares and I cut a whole load of squares at once. These are actually, quite honestly, these are actually the wrong size squares. These were slightly too small, and I wasn't able to use them, and that's why they're all piled up in my kit right here. But I want to just give you the idea of how to lay out your pieces on the diagonal of that square. In order to line this up perfectly with the diagonal of that square, you're going to want to fold your square from point to point and then give it a nice hot press. That's just going to give you a diagonal line that you can fuse on. Then you're going to place your leaf from point to point on that diagonal line. When you do that, you're going to end up with 1/4 of an inch around that leaf. That's why the sizes of the background squares and the accurately cut leaves are so important. So place that leaf on the diagonal of that square, and then once you put 2 squares together, you're going to be placing those together, right sides together, to sew them. You've got exactly 1/4 of an inch outside of your leaf, so you can put these squares together to make that one block a day for our temperature quilt. So that is all there is to it. Accurately cutting 4-inch leaves, accurately cutting 3 3/8 inch background pieces. That's how you're going to make your temperature quilt block, and make those blocks one day at a time, checking the high temperature and the low temperature for each day. You're going to decide, is the high going to go on the right? Is the high going to go on the left? And you're going to use your color chart to pick out those colors for each day and make your one block a day. So that is how I went about making my quilt with the cherry wood fabrics. And I love it. I think it's such a beautiful quilt. I cannot wait to finish quilting the last 2 seasons and actually get that quilt on my bed. That's one I'm making for me. So I'm really excited to get that finished, and that time is just around the corner. So the course that I ran for the temperature quilt hasn't ended yet. We're going to be assembling our 4 sections of that temperature quilt using Quilt As You Go methods. Then we're even going to quilt our borders separately. We're going to add on a quilted border, and we're using Pauline Rogers' method for quilt as you go. So that was last year's project. So what am I going to do this year? Well, I'm going to follow Beth Helfter's plan for her temperature quilt. Let me just move some things around so I can demonstrate what Beth did to make her temperature quilt blocks. So Beth's temperature quilt blocks were made also with fused fabric, but she also used unfused fabric. Sorry, I just threw my rotary cutter on the ground. She also used unfused fabric for the background of her applique square. Now the difference is that I used all the same background for my squares. So in order to get the high and low temperature for that day, I needed 2 different color leaves. Well, Beth wanted a smaller quilt, so she used 1 block and she used 4 inches square for her block, and then she cut out a circle for the high temperature, and the background of the block was the low temperature color. So she went over here to her temperature chart and she said, okay, I had a 41 degree day in the morning when it was cold, but it got up to 71 degrees in the afternoon. So she would choose a lime green fabric for her background and a dark orange fabric for her circle. So I want to show you the method that she used to rotary cut those circles to go on the backgrounds. So let's make a block as though we were going to make a block for Beth's quilt. So I just grabbed some fabric here, some random fabrics. This is actually the leftovers from my Tula Pink. So she wanted to use lime green. Let's see if I can find a lime green from unfused fabric. Let's see what I've got. Oh, this is pretty good. It's pretty limey. It's lime green and blue, but I think that that qualifies. So what we would do is just go ahead and grab that lime green fabric. Now, Beth used any lime green. Instead of having a color chart that said this lime green is what I'm going to use, she went through her stash and she used any lime green fabric for that day. So let's just press out this lime green fabric and we're going to go ahead and cut a 4-inch square. Now, another thing that Beth used as her rules was she was trying not to repeat her fabrics. So her quilt ended up being like a charm quilt with all different fabrics throughout the quilt. So once she used this fabric once, she set aside the fabric and did not necessarily ever use that fabric again. There were a couple of times she repeated. I think in that orange category, it was hard to find as many orange fabrics as she needed. So a couple of those fabrics were repeated. So it wasn't a strict rule, but it was a goal of hers. So Beth and I talked about it this morning, and I told her that I wanted to make a quilt just like hers. So we discussed this process. And then we talked about what would we do to finish up this quilt if we were to make this quilt together. Well, there'll be more information on that to follow because I said to Beth, if you were going to make this quilt if we were going to make it together, I probably would do the applique and you probably would make a border that incorporated accordion sewn triangles. We couldn't figure out a method to make accordion sewn triangles into our temperature quilt blocks using a different fabric every day, because one of the features of accordion sewn triangles is you get 2 triangles from every square that you cut. So we're looking at how do we put our heads together in order to make a temperature quilt that has a beautiful design, one, including the applique circles, and two, including some accordion sewn half square triangles. So stay tuned. My quilt may just have an accordion sewn half square triangle border at the end of 2023. I'll keep you all informed of my progress on that down the road. So I'm going to keep a bin. I'll be keeping a bin for my accordion sewn triangles. That means every time I cut a square for my background, I'm going to put the rest of that fabric in my bin, and that's going to go into the accordion sewn half square triangle border. So let's play with that this year. Now, after cutting your background fabric, we're going to go ahead and find the fabric that corresponds to the high temperature of the day. I'm going to use this bright fuchsia or magenta, so that means that my temperature for the high was between 81 and 90 degrees. Now that magenta fabric already has fusible on the back. If you have been playing with Rotary Cut Applique in the past with me, you probably have a pile of fabric or a bin of fabric that's already fused. So that's going to be my go-to bin to find all the colors for my circles for this temperature quilt. Now, what size are my circles going to be? If I use a 3-inch circle, let me grab my demo board here so you can see. If I use a 4-inch square, that 4-inch square cut is going to end up 3.5 in the quilt. So if I use a 3-inch circle on a 3.5-inch square, that doesn't leave a lot of background fabric, does it? So let's see what else we could do. We could use a 2 3/4 inch circle. I've got my True Grip right on there, so I can't see the number. But I'm thinking that this circle is it's 2.5. I'm sorry. Template B has a 2.5-inch circle. So I could use a 2.5-inch circle on my 4-inch square, and that's looking pretty good. I think that's probably the size that I want to use. I think Beth used some odd number of maybe 2 3/4 or something like that. I'm not sure what she used, but we will talk about that. I'm going to use 2.5 on a 4-inch square. My 4-inch square is going to end up 3.5. That's going to be a 1/2 inch between the edge of the pieced square and the circle, and I think that that is just perfect. Now, Beth hasn't taken any classes with me. She didn't realize that we can rotary cut our circles in a really easy way. So I'm going to go over here and grab my rotating mat, and I'm going to use my rotating mat to cut out these circles. Well, when I started talking to Beth about cutting her circles, she did use my tools, but she folded her fabric in quarters and put that quarter circle on so she could just cut from 90 to 0 and get a perfect little circle. Well, I said to Beth, you know, I find it easier to just fold my fabric once. When you start folding your fabric twice, there's more room for error, because if your folds aren't accurate, your circles may not be accurate either. But she really has the knack for it, because she cut all of her circles in quarters, and that worked out beautifully for her. So you have to find the method that works well for you. I'm going to show you my method of cutting the 2.5-inch circles using template B. I do have Grace True Grips on the back of the circle so that they don't slip or slide as you use them. Once again, I'm going to recommend you cut down low on your table. This table is way too high for me, but let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start cutting my circle, and as I get to a point where my hands are uncomfortable, I'm going to rotate that mat right around to cut a beautiful circle using the solid line on the tool. There's a solid line right here that marks half of the circle, it goes from 90 to 90. So I place that solid line on the fold of my fabric, and that's how I can easily cut out these circles. Let me show you again. I'm just going to start cutting. As it gets uncomfortable, just move your rotating mat around. Now this Martelli mat is the best rotating mat in order to make these shapes. So here we've got our circle and we've got our square. I'm going to fold that square diagonally twice to find the very center of that circle. I can also mark the center of this circle by putting the tool right over the center of the circle, and I can mark right through the hole in the middle of the tool to mark the very center of the circle. If I do that, I'm then going to grab a pin. I grab my pins right here. A nice fine pin works well. I'm going to put my pin right in the center of that circle, and I'm going to put my pin right in the center of the square where the two diagonal lines touch. Then I'm going to squeeze those down together so that that pin is helping you center the circle on the square. Now, of course, with such easy measurements, you could also look here and you could use the 3/4 of an inch measurement to make sure that your circle is centered on your square. 3/4 of an inch from each edge would be perfectly centered. You know what? You could probably just do that by eye as well. If you're confident, just center it by eye. Fuse that circle onto your square. And now we are ready for our decorative machine stitching. So cutting the square, cutting the circle, and stitching probably will take you about 3 or 4 minutes each day. I'm challenging you this year to sew for 23 minutes a day. So after your temperature quilt block is done, pop it up on the wall. I'm going to give you a little hint. What I do is I write the date right on the back of that circle. Then I'm going to go over and I'm going to blanket stitch the edges. Now you can use a blanket stitch, or there are loads of other stitches that you can use. Here we have a feather stitch. We have a different type of feather stitch. A blanket stitch that's small, a blanket stitch that's huge. You can do a zigzag stitch or even a straight stitch. Any of those stitches will permanently apply your applique to the background fabric. Once you get good at this, it's really fun and easy to stitch around these circular edges. I think for my quilt, I might use something fancy. I might use a feather stitch on this one. Feather stitch is very forgiving. The stitch does not have a center line. It kind of goes off in each direction at random angles. And so if you miss the edge of your circle, it's still going to look good. It's a great stitch for beginners. So use the feather stitch to go around your circles, and your blocks will be done in no time at all. So how are we going to assemble this into a quilt? Beth put 17 circles across in each row. She'll have a total of 21 rows, and that last row won't be filled because there is no evenly divisible number to make the exact same number of rows to fill up all your circles for 365 days. So what are you going to do with those extra squares? You might just want to write the year in those extra squares. You might want to use those extra squares as your label, or you might want to put your color chart on those extra squares so people know what the legend is for your temperature quilt. So I hope that you will think about doing a temperature quilt over the next few years. When you want to do a temperature quilt, make sure you join the Facebook group that is the Temperature Quilt Block a Day. That's the group that I started so that we could all share photos of our quilts in progress and have some fun together, encouraging each other along the way to stick to this project and make a beautiful quilt. Now there are temperature quilt designs that are all over the place. I'm giving you today just 2 simple ideas so that you can make a temperature quilt in a fast, easy, rotary cut applique way to make it go extra fast and get this quilt done. And I always say done is better than perfect. So I hope you've enjoyed our little dash into temperature quilts this time. I'm going to be posting this in the temperature quilt group. So if you're not on there yet, go ahead and sign up for the temperature quilt group on Facebook, and you'll find this video in there. You'll also find the 2 color charts that I'm going to be making. And if you like working with me on these videos, you're going to love our Ahead of the Curve membership. In Ahead of the Curve, my students work with me every month. They take live workshops, recorded workshops, on-demand workshops, and they have a whole slew of technique videos so that you can learn all different rotary cut applique techniques and rotary cut applique blocks. This is probably the easiest block that you will ever make with rotary cut applique. We can make beautiful applique quilts with this very same technique. So my goal in life is teaching quilters to fall in love with applique all over again. If you thought applique was hard, look again. Our applique quilts are fun to make, they're easy to make, and any quilter can accomplish these beautiful results with your applique quilts. So you're writing on the date. Oh, I'm reading some of your comments right now. Writing the date on the back is brilliant. It makes life so much easier. Absolutely. You do need to put your dates on the back so that if the cat walks by or the wind blows or the dog wags his tail and knocks your blocks off of the design wall, you can easily put them back in order so you can stitch your rows together perfectly. A reminder, discuss the stitching. Excellent. I think I did that with our heart shape that was stitched with all different designs. But what I recommend is you make your own stitching sample. Make a great big circle. You can even use the rings and things to make a great big 9-inch circle. Follow that inside with a 7-inch circle. And then you'll have all kinds of edges that you can test different decorative machine stitches with. You can test out your thread colors. You can use any thread to stitch these blocks. I have my favorite recommendations, and I'll share all of that with you when you are in our Rotary Cut Applique group. So I've mentioned a whole bunch of Facebook groups. You're going to be able to find me. The best way to find me is at SuePellandDesigns.com, or just search Rotary Cut Applique on Facebook, on YouTube. You're going to find my Rotary Cut Applique tutorials and videos. And if you want to work with me further, come along and join me at SuePellandDesigns.com. I've got lots of different ideas, patterns, bright, shiny quilts that will attract your attention and help you to learn this rotary cut applique technique. So I hope you can get started on your very own temperature quilt this year. If you're looking for the historical data, go to weatherunderground.com. You could even make a quilt for your birth year or a child's birth year. So the possibilities are endless. Go ahead and take a look at the Temperature Quilt Block a Day Facebook group, and you'll see loads of quilts using some of these ideas and so many more. Well, I want to wish you all a very happy holiday. I'm going to take the rest of the week off and get prepared for Christmas. I hope that you all have a healthy and happy and family-filled Christmas holiday, and I'll look forward to seeing you the week after here on Sewing in Slippers with Sue every Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. Bye, everybody, and happy holidays.